Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Strait Science. Strait Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Northwest Campus here in Nome and University of Alaska Sea Grant, also in Nome. And both Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region. We serve all peoples of the region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. Now tonight we've got right here, our speaker is not on a different time zone or, we have to explain it. No, we have Sara Henslee with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Division of Wildlife Conservation. She is our you're the area biologist. Okay, she's the AB, the area biologist. No, it's good. For Unit 22, I'm just slow. For Unit 22 here in Nome. So she is our area biologist for all the state wildlife. And tonight, we're going to hear a little bit more on, and I was just saying earlier, I wish we had these sort of talks for marine mammal regulatory needs. But to educate the audience on if you want to make a change with our hunting regs or come up with new ideas and things like that. There is a very good process, and we all need a refresher now and then, especially me. And so with that, we'll have Sara Henslee take it away. She is going to go dark, and we'll be watching the slides. So something's wrong with our camera here in the Northwest Campus room. So with that, thank you so much. We'll hear your voice, and here, come in so people can take a look before you disappear.
Hello, everyone. Good evening.
All right. With that, her voice will lead us on. Thank you so much. All right. Take it away, Sara.
So how do I change the slide when I, okay.
I would use these right here.
Cool. Okay. So good evening. Thank you, Gay, for the amazing introduction. I'm going to try to look at my slides. I might just stand here because I know that there are people in the room. So sorry, Alicia. So like Gay said, I'm the area wildlife biologist. I've been in this role for 4 years now, and I was the assistant for a few years before that. Really happy to be here. And I wanted to give this Strait Science presentation today because we are entering the Board of Game cycle for our area. So the Bering Strait, western area, which I'll get more into in a little bit. I feel bad that my back is turned to Alicia.
All good.
Okay, let's see if this works. It does not. Space.
Try this.
Okay.
It has a wheel on top. There you go.
Click.
Yep, or click.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so.
Oh, thank you.
So to provide an overview of what I'll talk about, I first want to touch on what the Board of Game is for folks that are brand new to this process, what the purpose is, when it was established, things like that. And then we'll talk about how hunting regulations were created or are created in Alaska, and everyone's role from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, myself and Alicia as the managers, advisory committees, and then the public's role in the Board of Game process, submitting proposals, providing comments, and providing testimony. And then finally, we'll just go through the mock Board of Game process from submitting a proposal down to whether your proposal gets accepted and a new hunting regulation is established. And hopefully at the end, we can entertain questions.
I have a question right off the bat because can you kind of go over what the state's wildlife, what are kind of the animals you're in charge of for the hunting regulations? Because we have other harvests where it wouldn't be state, right?
Yes. So Alaska's wildlife, it's kind of a broad picture. What most of my work focuses on is bears, specifically brown bears, caribou, moose, muskox. Holy cow, I'm thinking of what else there is in our regulations. Wolverine, wolves, fur bears, beavers, all the small game. There's Alaska hares. There is a threatened and endangered species section of Fish and Game, but I think for the purposes of this presentation, I'll keep it 10,000 foot and we'll focus on the game species, just to start out with. But yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, let's go into what the Board of Game is. So here's the picture of the current makeup of the Board of Game. This is Alaska's regulatory authority that passes regulations. So everything you see in the Alaska Hunting Regulations book, these are the folks that put that in place. And one of the common misconceptions we hear is Fish and Game put this in, Fish and Game did this. And actually, Fish and Game, we're just the trust managers. And to put it in another way, we're just doing the marching orders of what the public tells us to do through the Board of Game process. The Board of Game is made up of 7 members that serve 3-year terms. These members are appointed by the governor and they're confirmed by the legislature. And these folks are supposed to represent various values, stakeholders, and interests within the state of Alaska to have a wide range of folks that represent the public of Alaska when we are thinking about these hunting regulations. That being said, the hunting regulations are on a 3-year rotating cycle. So we have meetings every 3 years to discuss proposals throughout various regions of the state, with the western area, that's our region, being the one that's coming up into the next cycle. I think I was just going to touch on the history of the Board of Game there. So this has existed essentially since statehood. It was the Board of Fish and Game originally. So that's from the 1960s. And then around 1975, it did split into the individual Board of Game and Fish. Next, I'll go into the Board of Game process. This is kind of a complicated infographic, but I'm going to break it down bit by bit. So I've talked about the circle in the middle there, the 7 members appointed by the governor, who the Board of Game is. They do have 2 meetings a year. And again, we will be the next meeting coming up, and with the meeting being on January 2027. Along with the interior region being that Fairbanks area. And then up top there, we've got sort of the 3 main groups playing into the regulatory process. We've got Fish and Game on the left, we've got the advisory committees in the middle, and the public on the right. And all of these entities can provide proposals and submit comments to the Board of Game. And I'll break it down bit by bit on what everybody's role is in these 3 groups. And then finally, these 3 groups submit the proposals or comments, the Board of Game meets, and then the hunting regulations are established with what the board decides to support in each meeting. But yeah, we'll break this down more. I just wanted to look at this to get started. So first we'll look at Fish and Game's role. Again, if Alaska's wildlife are held in the public trust, then Fish and Game are the trust managers, with our mission being to protect, maintain, and improve Alaska's wildlife resources. So we mostly focus on the biology. We want to make sure that there's enough wildlife and game for generations to come to continue hunting and enjoying Alaska's wildlife resources. And so we do submit proposals, but for the most part, we do focus on what I've called biological concerns. And that focuses on, for example, if there's a lot of hunting happening in an area that needs to be regulated because there's concerns of too many moose being harvested, so over harvest, where, for example, the RM 840 area by Nome, if we didn't have a quota, then there would be the chance that too many bulls could get harvested and then no bulls would be available for breeding cows. We would struggle with pregnancy rates in our population, what have you. So we focus on the biology, and conversely, we like to provide opportunity wherever it exists. So our mandate is to provide as much what's called sustained yield as possible. So we want to make sure folks can harvest as much as they can without taking away from the population more than what are within the objectives set by Fish and Game and public values. And then finally, we do address enforcement issues as well. If there's hunting regulations that are too complicated and end up having a lot of issues with enforcement, or folks just don't understand what the regulations or boundaries are. We like to address that, and I try to make regulations more simple wherever I can in our area. With that being said, Fish and Game will usually be neutral on allocative decisions. I meant to mention that before, but allocative just means selecting between different user groups. So, for example, if there was a question of if we should allow non-residents to hunt, if we should allow residents that are local to hunt over all residents and things like that, those are going to be allocative decisions that Fish and Game will not comment on. But that's where the public can come in, that's where the advisory committee comes in, and that is the mandate of Board of Game to decide on those allocative decisions and who gets to harvest where and how and when. That is all the mandate of the Board of Game, whereas Fish and Game is really just focused on this is how many moose I think is sustainable for the population. And yeah, just to underscore again, Fish and Game does not set regulations, the public does through the Board of Game process. We submit proposals, just like the public, just like advisory committees. That being said, to talk about advisory committees, there's 84 advisory committees throughout the state of Alaska, and these are just public representative groups. So these are supposed to represent specific areas within Alaska. We have 2 for our game management unit, that being Unit 22, and I'll show a map in a second of those advisory committees. And these are our local representatives that are supposed to represent any concerns of the public, any values that they would like to see in our hunting regulations. And these advisory committees meet twice a year, and their purpose is they have a lot of interface with Fish and Game. We provide updates to them about what's going on with our population surveys. And they get a lot of face time with the Fish and Game staff. And then they can submit proposals as representatives of their communities to the Board of Game. And yeah, I just wanted to put a plug in here. If you are really passionate and interested about this regulatory process, you can actually become an advisory committee member. And here, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then finally, the public's role. So advisory committees are made up of members of the public. But even if you're not on the advisory committee or you don't know anybody on the advisory committee, you can still make change. And I think this is one of the most interesting things about Alaska and our regulatory process is the fact that the public can submit proposals and they can provide comments and testimony. And I think the public has a really strong voice in inspiring change in Alaska, which you don't necessarily see in other states. So for example, in New York, where I went to school, the department there just puts proposals forward and the public has the opportunity to comment on those, but they can't submit a change themselves. They can only comment. But here in Alaska, you can submit any proposal about any hunting regulation that your heart desires. So I think that's really cool. It's pretty unique, and the public holds a lot of sway in Alaska. So I think it's empowering for the public to know that. And again, they provide proposals, they provide comments and testimony. Next, I'll talk about our local advisory committees. So this is the Arctic region. Where do I want to get specific here? We specifically are in Game Management Unit 22. So that's kind of the lower left of the map. And we have 2 advisory committees here. So first we have the northern, I guess my arrow goes to Southern Norton Sound first. So we have the Southern Norton Sound Advisory Committee, which is representing the communities of Koyuk, Shaktoolik, Unalakleet, St. Michael, and Stebbins. So you can see that there on the map. And then the Northern Norton Sound represents everybody else in Game Management Unit 22. So Elam, Golovin, White Mountain, Nome, Teller, Recognition, Wales, and Shishmaref. And as you can guess, that is a massive area for one advisory committee. So these 2 advisory committees, they have a lot of sway in what the regulations look like in our area.
Question.
Yes.
Back to that map
Yes.
right there. we have someone on the line from St. Lawrence Island, and if you can, maybe, what does that mean, St. Lawrence Island AC?
Yes, that is a great question. And they have their own advisory committee, but they haven't met since 2011. So
How would that work? Is that a look?
I wonder if it's because there's so few game species, like there's foxes and
Big game.
state game. Yeah, state managed game. And I do believe it's a lot of federal land out there as well.
No, it's private property.
Private property.
I
Okay.
believe, yeah, there's no federal land out there.
Okay, so
To my knowledge.
it
I couldn't
could,
speak
yeah,
to
if
you more.
there was the interest, then I think they could reach out. And on the next slide, I'll have our board support member, her contact information and email if
Okay.
the individual was interested. I don't know how many people they would need to have quorum, I guess. But I was looking at this the other day because I thought this was really interesting and yeah, they haven't met in 15 years.
Okay.
So, and I don't know why. So yeah, there's definitely something to look into more. And a very good question. Let's see. So I guess I'll go back to Northern Norton Sound, the advisory committee here. So again, I zoomed in on all of the communities for that area. And I've actually put a list of all the advisory committee members here. This is online and publicly available. So if you search Fish and Game Northern Norton Sound Advisory Committee, you will find this list of your members. And if you know anybody and you feel strongly about a hunting regulation, if you would like to bend their ear about a change, or if you have questions about what's going on with your local game populations, these are your representatives, and we speak with them fairly frequently. They should have a lot of that information for you. At the top is the regional board support member. So as I'm talking about this, if you would like to be included on when these people have meetings, I would recommend reaching out and emailing or calling her, because she can include you on meetings and make sure that you're able to join and you know when these meetings happen. All of these members have seats that expire. We have elections periodically. And as you can see by the blue stars here on the screen, we have a lot of vacant seats. So for example, Teller, Brevig, Golovin, Wales, we actually don't have any representatives from those communities right now. I do believe our board support person works pretty closely to try to find some individuals, and elections do happen, but these are the vacant seats currently. So if anybody is tuning in from these communities and wants to participate, I highly recommend reaching out to Sam. And there is one undesignated seat, which can be anyone from these communities, including Nome. So if anybody is listening in from Nome, wants to be involved, that's an option too. And as you can see, there's several seats that are expiring in June. But there's a lot of seats on the Northern Norton Sound. And if you know any of these folks, yeah, absolutely bend their ear on proposals, which I'll talk why that's important in a little bit. Then with Southern Norton Sound Advisory Committee, these are the communities of Koyuk, Shaktoolik, Unalakleet, St. Michael, and Stebbins. And yeah, a few vacant seats there again, a few expiring terms coming up. And the thing I wanted to direct folks' attention to, just in case anyone is tuning in from those communities, is there is an advisory committee meeting coming up on Monday, this Monday. And if you reach out to the Sam in that contact information there, or you can call me, email me, I can make sure I get you the information to tune into that meeting, or you can look it up online by just searching Southern Norton Sound Advisory Committee. It's on the Fish and Game website too. So those are your two local bodies that represent the communities of Unit 22. Moving on into kind of why I'm here talking to you guys today. There is, like I said, the upcoming cycle for the Western and Interior region is coming up. The Western region applies more to you. So that's everything in blue on this map, including game management units 18, 22, with all our 5 subunits, units 23, and then 26A. So that Western part of unit 26 up on the North Slope. So that's the area that you can submit a hunting regulation for anything you want in that area. And the deadline is coming up fast. It's next Friday, May 1st, to submit proposals. So if there is something you're toying around with submitting, now's the time to get it drafted. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the deadline is coming up fast. And then how do you get involved in the public board of game process? If you are interested in changing a regulation, or maybe you just want to understand why something is the way it is, there's a lot of different options you can go through, and then you can talk to various interests that might represent or share the same values as you as you're thinking about this proposal. So you could always come into the Fish and Game office. I'm around, and my assistant Alicia is always happy to talk to folks if I'm not there either. We really do love hearing from the public and
Put in your number.
seeing, yeah, I will have my number at the end, yep.
Yeah, put it in the chat.
Oh,
too.
perfect, yeah, come in. We are really more than happy to hear folks just to see what they're seeing out in the country. If something is changing, like we want to know about it. So you could come in, talk to us about what you're seeing or what your interests are. Alternatively, you can attend an advisory committee meeting, which I just talked about, and you can try to pitch your idea to the advisory committee. And I'll talk about why that's important in a second too, to get the advisory committee on board with your proposals. And finally, you could always pitch your idea to a stakeholder group. So I put a couple examples. There's Coeric, Resident Hunters of Alaska. You could probably guess what their interests are and what their values are. And the school, for example, if you were looking for a youth hunt or ways to engage younger generations with hunting and getting interested, going to the principal, going to teachers, trying to get them on board with your ideas. It's just the more folks you can get that support your idea, it holds a lot more sway, especially with the board of game process. But that being said, you don't necessarily need to have anyone's support. You could submit any proposal about anything you want. And which I just said it. So moving on into the board of game process with submitting the proposal, I wanted to show you what the proposal actually looks like. I don't want this to be intimidating to folks. I know there's a lot of text going on, but really the most important things to look at here are at the bottom of the proposal form. Number 2 says, what is the issue you would like the board to address and why, which is where you fill in what your regulatory change is. If you want to change a bag limit, you want to make a season longer, you want to be able to hunt something that you can't, this is your opportunity to put that issue in. The solution that you recommend, that's where you would say, I would like the season to be 2 weeks longer. I would like to close non-resident hunting. I would like to open resident hunting, things like that. And then it asks if you developed your proposal in coordination with others. So that's why I said that the advisory committee, getting them on board, coordinating with them, or even having the advisory committee submitting the proposal on instead of you. Those things hold a lot of sway as you get into the board of game process. The things on top, as far as the game management unit, hunting, the administrative code, that number 1, and the regulation book page number, those are all things we can help you out with at the Fish and Game office. Alicia and I are also available to help draft proposals if you need help with regulatory language, if you need help finding what the hunting regulations are. These are all things that Fish and Game is more than happy to assist with as you're thinking about these ideas. So I really do encourage you. Yeah, if this is your first time submitting a proposal, we really are more than happy to help folks. And a lot of times it could be the difference between a proposal getting adopted and not. It's just knowing what to ask for. And we have worked with a lot of folks throughout the years with getting this in place. That's the proposal form. This you can find on the Board of Game, I guess, the site, the Fish and Game. If you look up Alaska Department of Fish and Game, hunt.alaska.gov, there's a section that says like Board of Game proposals open for the Western area. And if you go and navigate to that site, you can actually click a button that says submit a proposal and do it that way. The whole thing can be a very short process. You don't have to make it lengthy, and there will be more opportunities to comment on in the future. So it can be as simple as just saying, I want a season to be longer, or I want these regulations in place. Once you've submitted the proposals, after May 1st, Alicia and I at Fish and Game, we get this long list of what all of the proposals are for the area, sorted by game management units. So Alicia and I managed game management unit 22. That's the southern and northern Norton Sound region. And we will now look at all these proposals and develop what's called the analysis and recommendation. And this is, to be honest, it's a little dry, but the focus is just like with the proposal, we talk about what the biology is, what we expect the change to be, if there's any concerns with the proposal, and what the effect might be on our users, as well as the background. So if you submitted a proposal of, for example, I want only Nome residents to hunt in 22C. We would talk about what the history of moose hunting is in 22C, why it's open to who it is now, things like that. And then finally, we comment on what our position is. So we might be supportive if there's extra moose to be available and someone's asking to extend the season. So if we still have moose available by the season end date, we would support extending the season. We are most likely going to be neutral on anything that's allocated, which is again choosing between different user groups, between non-residents and residents, local users or not. Those are things that we do not comment on. We leave it for the public process with Board of Game and the advisory committee. Or we can oppose it if we think that it might result in overharvest. So that's the analysis and recommendation. This stuff all goes online for the public to read, and they can mull it over, and the Board of Game members will read this as well. Once those analysis and recommendations are in, we also allow, or the Board of Game allows for public comment. And there's two different ways the public can comment on this. Even if you didn't submit any proposal, I highly recommend still looking through all of the proposals that are online, because it probably affects you, even whether you submitted it or not. It's worth looking into. You can provide written proposal, which I've given an example of here. This one's short and sweet from the 2024 last Board of Game process related to the trophy destruction of muskox, where we used to require horn tip cutting. This individual just said, I wanted to use these horn tips for local arts and crafts. That's an example of a public comment. And the board really appreciates hearing from members of the public to understand what the concerns are with proposals. And this gives them a lot of insight. There's the written proposals or the written comments, but you could also provide in-person testimony. So at the Board of Game meeting, if you have the opportunity to travel to Kotzebue, which is where the next meeting is going to take place in January, you could travel to the Board of Game, you could provide your testimony in person. The Board of Game can ask you questions in real time, and they really appreciate hearing what you're seeing on the landscape, and they really take this stuff to heart, whether you're providing written or public comment. With that being said, I do really want to emphasize how important your local knowledge and your input matters in this process. I know with a lot of regulatory processes, it feels like your voice doesn't matter, but I really believe that with the Board of Game and state Alaska hunting regulations, the public process is really strong. The Board of Game really looks to the public and the advisory committees to understand what's going on and what the local issues are. And Fish and Game can only do so much. There's two staff. I have myself and my assistant, and we're responsible for managing all of Game Management Unit 22 from Stebbins up to Wales, up to Shishmaref. That is the size of the state of West Virginia, and there's two of us to manage. We have a couple research staff that are shared with the rest of our region, and we just can't be everywhere at once. So obviously, like Alicia and I can only see so much, and the public is incredibly important in filling in those gaps. So what you're seeing when you're out hunting, when you're out hiking, if you saw a lot of moose and now you see none in a certain area, if you're seeing a ton of moose, if you're seeing no calves, triplets, lots of muskox dead suddenly, all of these things are incredibly important. And then any values that you have for the region. This stuff, it's really insightful for the Board of Game. They really respect public opinion. And it does make a difference on how they vote with all of these proposals. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. Outside of the public comment, there's also the opportunity for your representatives on the advisory committees to provide comments on each proposal. For the most part, they will only comment on the areas that are specific to them. So with the Northern Norton Sound, they're going to stay in their region and they'll likely defer to Southern Norton Sound for anything happening in 22A, for example. So they will go through each proposal one by one during these meetings, and they will decide if they support it, if they don't want to take any action, because like you see here, I guess I don't have my laser pointer, but the number 24, proposal 24. Oh, it's like, oh, here we go. Let me see if I can do this. Here on the proposal 24, you see they took no action. This was the Northern Norton Sound. Because it was in 22A, they didn't want to take any action. They would defer to what the Southern Norton Sound wanted to do. Meanwhile, they will support, they'll oppose, support each individual proposal and provide the reason why. So the Board of Game can understand why they're making the positions that they are. Again, this is another opportunity for you as a single member of the public to attend these meetings and help understand why this proposal should or should not be adopted, and get comments in the public record like this. And the advisory committee, as well as the public, they hold a lot of sway in this allocative issues. So normally the board does look to the advisory committees and they look to public testimony to understand what the desire is of the community of these hunting regulations. See if I can go to the next one. Oops. That's just an example of an advisory committee looking at information. Again, to just touch on that allocative concept a little bit more, because I know it's kind of abstract. So just to emphasize, allocative issues are just anything that chooses one group of users over another, whether they're resident, non-resident, non-consumptive users, birders, like these are all different user groups that the Board of Game can direct regulations to accommodate or not. These are absolutely things that the public advisory committees weigh in on, and the Board of Game makes decisions accordingly. But Fish and Game will not comment on a lot of these allocative issues, because at the end of the day, we're just concerned that the harvest is sustainable and we don't necessarily mind who gets it or how or when or things like that. We just want to make sure there's enough animals and enough game for folks to take year after year in a sustainable manner. A couple of the examples I wanted to provide here are the permit availability. So I don't know if folks are familiar necessarily, but RM 840 is our local moose hunt. And it's only available in Nome. The permits are only available in Nome, Golovin, White Mountain, Teller, and Brevig during a certain amount of time. Excuse me. Start coughing now. Oh my gosh, sorry, I might have to take a break. I'm sorry. Holy cow.
Check it out for a, see if I can cough drop. Speaker's gonna go have, take a second to have quick cough in the hall and they'll be right back. How about one of these? Couldn't hurt, could it? Any questions at this point? I know I've got some. Hang on, Charlie, I see you. Let me undo myself here.
Oh, wait, I don't want to do audio.
Okay, while Alicia's fixing her throat, go ahead, Charlie, what's your question?
Well, it's more of a comment than a question. So I'm the chair of the Northern Norton Sound Advisory Committee, and I would just wanted to emphasize some of the things that's been said so far. But you know, the role of the advisory committee is a public review of wildlife regulations and fish regulations. And we meet at least 2 times a year and often more. Um, the and it's, if you have a pet issue that you're really concerned about, um, coming to the advisory committee is a good idea, because you can go talk to the biologists at Fish and Game and get their read, but oftentimes they'll give you an opinion based on abundance and what they think the population can be, and they'll tell you some of the legal parameters of what goes on. But if you really want to know what's going to work, you probably need to bounce your idea off other people in the public, and that's what the advisory committee is. So we serve as a sounding board for people that have an idea, and many of us have our own ideas, but we'll it's a free service. You can get Fish and Game to help you write a proposal, or you can get an advisory committee to help you write the proposal. And oftentimes, if you can get the support of the advisory committee behind your proposal, as well as a couple of your friends, it's much more powerful than just you by yourself. So anyway, I wanted to put a pitch in for the advisory committee, and you could see from the table they presented that there are some vacancies. We have kind of at-large seats, that represent the entire northern Norton Sound area, or individual community representatives. If you're applying for an individual community representative, you need to get the backing of your community. So lots of times, if you're in Nome, there's several seats for Nome, but if you're looking at Teller or Elam or some seat like that, you'd want to get the backing of your IRA or your city. But yeah, we have elections almost every year, and you show up at our meeting, and you have a really good chance of being a member if you want to be. So can't guarantee that, but you have a very good chance. So anyway, come to our meeting sometime. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'll be able to talk now.
Hope you're not allergic to lavender. The continue on if you can.
Holy cow, I hope so.
You can chew those things.
Sorry, oh my gosh. I can't. Oh my gosh. I have a terrible frog in my throat.
Okay. Well, while Alicia's and Charlie, I'm gonna put you a little bit on point. Oftentimes, because I'm not as involved in the state land animals, what is in like a 50,000 view overhead? What's the difference between the Board of Game and the Rural Advisory Committee, or the RAC? Sometimes I know people get confused. I know I get confused. Is there a easy way to give us a what's the difference there?
Yeah, so the RAC and the advisory committee are roughly equivalent. The RAC is the federal advisory committee, and the Fish and Game advisory committee is the state advisory committee. So in Norton Sound or in the Seward Peninsula, there's not that much federal land, and so the Fish and Game advisory committee has more area to comment on than the RAC does. Whereas in the Northwest Arctic, like Kotzebue area, there's a lot more federal land, and therefore the RAC often carries the day when you're commenting on say caribou or some other population up there. So the Board of Game and the Federal Subsistence Board are kind of equivalent. The Board of Game There's the state agency that comments on wildlife rigs, and the Federal Subsistence Board comments on federal wildlife and fish. So I hope that is clear.
In addition to what Charlie said, one of the largest differences between state and federal ACs and the RACs and how the regulatory process works is the RAC under the federal hunting regs can give priority to federally qualified subsistence users. And that is a designation of being in rural Alaska and being from a particular area, particular community, where the state of Alaska cannot give preference to somebody based off of where they live. The state of Alaska in legislative has decided that all Alaskans are subsistence users. So there's a big discrepancy. That's probably, to me, that's the largest discrepancy between state and federal, is the federal regulation and the regulatory process can differ between user groups within Alaska residents, where the state of Alaska Fish and Game regulations cannot.
So like rural versus urban
Correct.
for the federal.
So there are federal permits that you must be a resident of Elam to get that permit,
Right.
and then be on federal land to hunt under that permit. Where somebody in Anchorage may not be able to get that permit, and even somebody just in Golovin may not be able to get that permit because the permit is designed to give residents of Elam a preference. That's just an example.
Yeah.
Where the state of Alaska regulations are all Alaskans are qualified subsistence users. Everyone is a subsistence user.
Right. That's under the state constitution.
Correct.
Okay. So, and then I have another question, and I know the answer, but you're the pros, and that would be for our other large game harvest, which would be our marine mammal harvest. That is neither under the who is in charge. Well, I should just say the RAC and the Board of Game. Do they do anything for regulating the marine wildlife?
And that would be mostly, I feel like there's a lot of different entities, right? Like
There's not a lot.
Wildlife, NOAA.
There's only the two,
Okay.
and they have it divided into things. But I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that,
No
or
worries.
because we have this other large game harvest
Mhm.
going on, and it is a large, not only in volume but in size. I mean, we have some really
Yeah.
large animals
And-
in the ocean, and so those harvests are under neither the state of Alaska or the RAC
Yeah.
process, I believe.
Yeah.
But you're right, those are under NOAA. So Department of Commerce has authority over the seals, sea lions, and all the whales. And the US Fish and Wildlife Service for our region, Department of Interior, has the management and research authority on, and USGS on walruses and polar bear. That helps, just to round it out, because
Yeah.
we're such a diverse region, and you can be a land hunter and a marine wildlife hunter, and I think it can get a
Yeah.
lot.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Well, sorry about that, guys. I have a couple final slides, and then I think we'll be ready for any further discussions and questions. I guess just to summarize this slide here, the allocative proposals, I just wanted to provide examples of like permit availability. If a permit is only available till a certain date, if a permit is only available in certain areas like White Mountain and Golovin, those are allocative. That's where the public comes in, and that's the Board of Games decision to whether they adopt that allocative requirement or not. Okay, and then, yeah, this is where I wanted to emphasize, like, here's an example of our RM 840 hunt. Only available in person, Brevig, Golovin, Nome, Teller, or White Mountain from July 25th through August 25th. That was something put in place by the board that's allocated, so. Just an example there. And then finally, after all of these proposals are put in, public provides comments, testimony is made, we have our Board of Game meeting. This is where, again, like the public can attend, they provide their testimony, what they think we should do, or what they think the board should do on proposals, what their comments should be. The department will provide regional overviews of what's going on throughout Region 5, that being that Unit 18, 22, 23, and 26A. And then we'll provide proposals, presentations for each item and proposal for discussion. And then the board will discuss, they'll ask questions of the department, and they will make their position. They'll make the position and adopt, oppose, or take no action. And that's the Board of Game process. This is just a quick example of what our presentations might look like. We'll explain what each one is going, what each proposal will do, who it was proposed by, what our recommendation is, the advisory committee's positions. And then we'll provide a little bit of information. This is just an example of like our most recent population data for Unit 22 B and C. That's this area in blue. It's just an example of the information we might provide to the board to help them make a decision on if it's sustainable and where the population's at. Skip that. And then finally, if they do adopt your proposal, I just wanted to quickly kind of summarize, wrap up here. If your proposal is adopted, they would go live that next regulatory year. So regulatory years run from July 1st of the year to the next year, June 30th. It says right there on the front page of the regs what your regulatory year is. So if your proposal is adopted, you'll see it in there. And then the way that you would see where your proposals are, if you're really familiar with the regulations, but you really can't tell if how are you supposed to know if a regulation's changed or not? On one of the very first pages of the regulations will tell you what the major changes were by area. This most recent year, our unit was not up for regulatory change, so you don't see anything for Unit 22. That's on page 5. And then within the regulations themselves, you might see red text, which is right here where it says may be announced. That was a recent change. That was a recent change, may be announced. So there are different ways that you can tell if a hunting regulation is different. Just because our regulations aren't up for cycle, don't assume nothing's changed. It's always helpful to just take a quick glance before you go hunting or call your Fish and Game staff about what the regulations are.
And where can you go pick up a red book?
You can pick them up right at the office
Or here, yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
good.
And they're also available online, and if you have the Fish and Game app, you can download them. So there's a lot of different ways to have those regulations handy.
And they're at like AC store
You see, they're all over.
and at Hanson's, post office, I think, has them.
Yep.
So
and
lots of
then
public areas.
We always try to print out ones to put in people's post office boxes each year, to little like summary pages by game management unit. So yeah, there's your example of the red text. Yeah, putting it all together again, yeah, the Board of Game, there's all of our 3 main entities that submit proposals and comments to inform the Board of Game's decision-making process. And then whenever they adopt a proposal, it ends up in the new hunting and trapping regulations. Yeah, Fish and Game, we do whatever it is the Board of Game adopts, we manage accordingly. And the troopers are the ones that enforce those regulations. I did have this video here in the text. I don't think I have a way to play the video, but for folks that are interested in kind of hearing a condensed summary of the Board of Game process, Alaska Department of Fish and Game does do these working for wildlife videos. It's on YouTube and Vimeo. So if you just search working for wildlife, Alaska Board of Game, it's this whole process over again. The director speaks to it. The board members talk about it. It's just a nice little summary of the process. if you would like to look at that. With that, I'm pretty sure just a quick summary slide and then we're finished. Again, the important thing to know is the deadline is May 1st, that's next Friday. So proposals need to be drafted ASAP. You could bring them to the Fish and Game staff, you could bring them to the advisory committee members if you're curious and want their support. Anyone can submit a proposal. We're always available to help, provide information, draft proposals, anything you need from us. And yeah, if you want to get active, participate in the local advisory committee process. Even if you don't submit a proposal yourself, it's still really valuable to attend and understand what's happening out in the landscape, what Fish and Game is finding from their surveys, and to get public support on anything that you see out there. And then I didn't put this in there, but the meeting is going to be in Kotzebue, January 21st to the 25th. The Board of Game meeting to discuss all Unit 22 proposals. So January 21st through the 25th, 2027 in Kotzebue is our meeting date. So you can attend in person, you can provide public comment, whatever you would like to do. With that, I'm finally finished. Thanks for hanging in there. And sorry about my illness. I have a daughter in daycare, so she gets me sick, as you could probably guess. Happy to take comments at this time. Thank you guys.
Hopefully that's the photo for the 2020.
I know, this is the cover.
Yeah,
This will be the cover.
So, all right, well, thank you so much, Sarah, and I will try to get over here so you people can see your face and I'll come join you. But right now, if now is the time, it took Sarah, she's had a long day anyway, and she also has a daughter waiting for her at home, and she has a frog in her throat, and she still was able to pull it off. So we really appreciate Sarah's effort, and now is the time to throw a little love in the chat box before the questions, and we'll take it from there. I know I've got some questions. Oh, you're getting some claps from Jim Dory and others. So, yep. So let's see. I'm going to put my video on, and maybe you can drive if you'd like to from there.
Thank you.
Try there.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, heavy laptop. Thanks, everybody. Let's see.
Any
Do we
questions in the chat? Thanks for sharing the bog process. Edwin, did you have any other specific questions regarding that rack question you had earlier today? It was perfect timing.
Yeah, it's been a learning process for me, how these regulations come to work. And I know that our people, they're subsiding and, living off the land and the sea as inherently as they are in their history. And it's a good practice to, monitor things and manage things so that they're in good standing. I support, translating and monitoring for our people, even if it has to be private. And I think to learn how to put these into context and paper would be a challenge to work with the department in some of the species that we have. I know we don't have too much on the island for us to regulate because it's rare for us to cite some of these things, and they're usually harvested or hunted down to control decimating the reindeer population. Like the wolves or wolverines are usually hunted down when one is spotted, and so those are rare occurrences, and including the moose, which was socializing with the reindeer at the time I've seen. And so I thought of, if they're doing any interbreeding, but it's been over 15 years, so the moose is probably deceased. And so I thought of things like that now. But some of these non-local animals that come in, they're usually hunted down, so, and that's a rare occurrence, so I'm in support of that. But if there's a good number of them, it's good to report, and so that the word is out how things are shifting. We're starting to see brown bears washing up. They're probably, going out on the broken ice, and including the moose and the wolves during that same time when the wolves were caught. I think around 2004, I seen a moose herd in the herd of the reindeer, and it was roaming with them. So I kind of thought of if they were doing any breeding, if there's any case, but that's something to look into. And I just wanted to share some of that, and it's interesting to learn the process of putting things into context. But we depend on a lot of the migrating marine mammals and birds, and we're very conservative, with the way we preserve our foods for days on and months on. Thank you for your showing all the process.
Thank you, Edwin.
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. And I think it's a good reminder, we St. Lawrence Island is seen as, way offshore, but when it's wintertime, the land bridge is in and animals walk back and forth. I think we had a Strait Science this winter with Chris Barger with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and he studies the Alaska hare, the large Arctic hare. I don't know what you call it, Alaska hare, Arctic hare, the big one with the black tips on the top of its ears. And, Diomede was on the phone for that because they have these rabbits trippy trop right over, and you wouldn't normally think of the islands as having itinerant populations of large game, but that is what occurs, right? That it's not very far away at all. So thank you very much, Edwin, for that. And maybe, holy cow, there might be interest in re-upping the St. Lawrence Island Advisory Committee. That's a pretty interesting, I learned there, I didn't know there was such a, that you guys have your own unit, so to speak, or your own
Advisory committee.
advisory panel. I think that's kind of a powerful thing, though you don't have a lot, but you do have some things that might be really of a good thing.
Yeah,
So.
we have a lot of good traditional knowledge about the games we hunt, and just the climate changing, it's shifting, the animals are moving north, and some species are coming this way. Maybe it would be a time to exercise some of these processes to look after. But being from a private island, there's really, within this boundary, we're kind of conservative where we are with the limited resources that we have. And but other than that, our inherent right to harvest the marine mammals within our boundaries or area, that's very special for us to continue that. And it's just a learning process where we're still developing or growing in our numbers to fill in some of these jobs that are needed, with our language too, and it's important to continue our culture. And I thank you guys for your for this program.
Yeah, thank you, Edwin. Always nice to hear from that area, because we don't get out there, and we're always interested to hear.
And last but not least on that, if there's disease, because now the state of Alaska, you guys were sent the fox
Yes.
from St. Lawrence Island, and you test those for disease. So if it's that it's a state animal? I know we're off topic here a little bit, but it's a state managed animal. So in that case, you could send something in and work with a biologist here to look for the rabies, even if it was like a wolverine.
Yeah.
Right? If you wanted to swab it or get it checked for avian influenza or the bird flu,
Yeah.
or if there was something wrong. Because we're so lucky with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game is right here in the hub. So you guys will get samples to the state vet. We can't unfortunately have that same with the federally managed species
Yeah.
often, but for the state managed species, you could, if say St. Lawrence Island or Diomede or Teller or Shaktoolik sees a
Sick,
Oh,
weird animal.
yeah, sick weird Wolverine or something that, foxes we're all kind of aware of, but something funny that's not right, and they harvest it, and then they could call you and say, call the state office if it's a land animal, and the service that you all provide is provided to all in the region. So including the islands, including every community we have.
Yeah, send it our way for sure. We have an amazing state veterinarian that loves testing everything. And there's some weird stuff that happens out here and
Yes.
weird diseases you wouldn't expect, and
Yes.
we won't know unless people send it in. So it's great.
And that's an incredible service the state does for all of us out here for the state managed land animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's important we continue to learn, and our kids, our generation, they will be interested in some of these projects, and so if they're available, they'll be able to fill in as they go. And to start it off, I've been trying to learn how RAC is set up, how things are proposed, and this is just a start, so it's a learning process.
Awesome. Well done, Edwin. I see that Charlie has his hand up again. Go
Yeah.
for it, Charlie.
Okay, well, yeah, Edwin, I think I was a fish and game biologist 20 years ago, and I traveled to St. Lawrence Island twice to meet with committees on both Gambell and Savunga. So there are not only game, but the advisory committee also advises on fish, and so there are commercial fisheries that occur, in the waters of St. Lawrence Island, and so they're in state water, and you might want to. There might be an instance when you'd wanted to comment on one of those fisheries. Also, just like wildlife, there's a fish lab that looks into diseased fishes. And so if you found a fish that was having a problem, you could get a free service and get that fish examined to see what was wrong. And on the wildlife issue, I remember when some caribou came across from Siberia to St. Lawrence Island, and they had to be held in quarantine for brucellosis. So that does happen. And if you believe an animal came over from the Russian side, you might want to talk to a pathologist about potential diseases that could be transported by that animal. I think that's more likely to affect your reindeer herd than a moose just wandering around on the island. So that's just some unsolicited advice, but that's what I think. So thanks.
Charlie,
Yeah.
quick question. Oh, go ahead, Edwin. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're starting to, we know a lot about our fish and our language and the history, the way the mouth came to be on the inlet, and because where erosion and corrosion, they're both working with the climate and over time, and we've lost a lot of coastal area in some areas, and the numbers on our fish, where the way we're doing our subsistence, we see a little bit of change here and there, so we're noticing some things, and we share amongst our people here too. And but with the climate changing rapidly, where it's concerning to find what the cause is, and with the red algae and walruses being affected, and seems like a lot of species are being affected. So who knows how the next El Nino is going to bring.
Yeah.
quick follow-up question, Charlie, to you. This is Gay. For the free service for getting your state waters, state managed fish, getting that service for disease, would that also apply to crab?
Yes,
Okay.
so the lab's in Anchorage, and very often you don't want to freeze the sample for biological disease kind of sampling. So,
Yeah.
so it's really important to get it refrigerated, but not frozen. And then we can figure out how to get it to the lab. But as soon as you find it, get it in a refrigerator.
So that's a great one. Thank you, Charlie. And it's really nice to be able to remind people in the region that we do have all these services to help with diseases, because that is on a lot of people's mind nowadays with all the stuff that is happening in the region. So thank you for that, Charlie. And I'm really glad that applies to crabs as well as state water fish.
I really think if they'd be able to send us some like containers or some things to ship stuff out, and maybe that information to ship it out, get an email from you, maybe, Gay.
Yep. So
And,
go ahead.
yeah, I'd be interested in, some taking a little bit of samples from here and there, and just to get them out to check what's going on. And I know I noticed that in some with our marine mammals, and like we talk about in our meetings, but we're still harvesting, but we need answers too.
Very good point, Edwin. So all that we've mentioned so far can be done under the state system. And I think it's also really good. You've got Sara Henslee's number on the screen and in the chat. And the main office number for Fish and Game is 443-2271. That during the business hours, you can get a hold of whoever, whether it's a fish person or a crab person or a moose person, caribou person. But for the marine mammals, that's a whole different, unfortunately, situation where we are trying to do that. Our federal managers and researchers, as you are well aware, are not located, and we have a very large game harvest here. So that's why we are relying on researchers and individual efforts and things like that. It's not ideal for the marine mammals at all. I wish we had this kind of service up and down the coast. So good for the state of Alaska Department of Fish and Game, for Alicia and Sara. They're set up to get you answers for the land animals. And as Charlie just mentioned, the fish that are in state waters and crab. So for marine mammals, we still will connect with researchers and try to get word to the NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and in some cases, the U.S. Geological Survey. And we'll have to work it that way, remotely, basically. So thank you very much.
I think that's everybody.
Is that everybody? Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, next Strait Science is going to be on the 30th. It will be next Thursday night, and it will be harmful algal bloom related. We have Sara Shane, who is a biologist with the Geological Survey at the Alaska Science Center in Anchorage. She's done a lot of work on saxitoxin, especially saxitoxin, which is produced by a harmful algae called Alexandrium. And she's been looking at seabirds' health. And she's going to give the results of her extensive work she's done on Alaskan seabirds and also the small forage fishes. And she's going to talk from her research, her results from several harmful algal bloom events in Alaska and several seabird die-off events. So Tune in on April 30th and we'll hear the latest as we go into the spring on the harmful algal bloom toxins and Alaska's seabirds. With that, where did everybody go? With that, that's it. There's Sarah. Thank you again,
you
Sarah,
again.
for that. And actually, let's give a shout out here to Alicia.
Hi, guys.
Yep, she partners on all things. She's second in command. So with that, we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much, you guys. Have a good night. Have a good night, everyone.